The summer sun hung low over the endless plains, turning the tall prairie grass into waves of gold that stretched farther than the eye could see. A warm wind whispered across the land, carrying the scent of wild sage and distant rain. To travelers, the open frontier looked peaceful, almost untouched by the world beyond it. But beneath its beauty lay uncertainty, where every journey demanded courage and every mile carried unseen danger. 22-year-old Eleanor Whitmore adjusted the bonnet that shielded her face from the sun as the wagon rolled slowly along the rough trail. Beside her sat her younger brother, Thomas, while their father guided the horses. They had left Missouri nearly 2 months earlier, hoping to build a new life farther west. Like countless other families, they dreamed of fertile land, opportunity, and a future free from hardship. Yet Eleanor couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had followed them for days. The wagon train had grown quieter. Campfires burned lower each night, and conversations often turned to whispered stories of raids, missing travelers, and conflicts between settlers and native tribes. Some tales painted the Comanche as ruthless warriors who attacked without mercy. Others insisted those stories were exaggerated by fear and misunderstanding. Eleanor didn't know what to believe. Her father, Jonathan Whitmore, was a practical man. Fear travels faster than truth, he often reminded her. Still, he kept his rifle within arm's reach. Late that afternoon, the trail narrowed between rolling hills. The lead wagons disappeared over a rise, leaving Eleanor's family slightly behind the others. The silence felt strange. Even the birds had stopped singing. Then came the sound. A distant thunder. At first Eleanor thought it was a storm approaching, but the rhythm grew faster, steady, powerful, unmistakable. Horse hooves. Her father stood immediately. "Stay inside the wagon." Before anyone could react, riders appeared along the ridge like shadows emerging from the earth itself. They rode with astonishing speed and precision, their horses moving as though they were part of the wind. The wagon train erupted into chaos. Men shouted. Women screamed. Horses panicked. Gunfire echoed across the prairie. Jonathan fired once before pulling Eleanor and Thomas toward the ground. "Run," he shouted. But there was nowhere to run. Smoke drifted across the trail as frightened settlers scattered in every direction. Eleanor grabbed Thomas's hand, trying to pull him toward a cluster of rocks, but another explosion startled the horses. The frightened animals bolted, separating the family within seconds. "Thomas!" She reached for him, but someone collided with her from behind. She stumbled down a grassy slope, striking the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. When she looked up, riders surrounded her. Their faces remained calm, disciplined, not wild as the stories had described. One warrior dismounted without speaking. He noticed the small revolver trembling in Eleanor's hand. Instead of attacking, he slowly held out his palm. She hesitated. The weapon suddenly felt useless. With shaking fingers, she surrendered it. The warrior nodded once before helping her stand. His actions confused her. She had expected violence. Instead, there was restraint. Nearby, another rider signaled toward the horizon. The attack was ending almost as quickly as it had begun. Within minutes, the surviving settlers had fled, and the warriors gathered what they needed before preparing to leave. Eleanor searched desperately for her family. She saw broken wagons, loose horses, scattered supplies. But no sign of her father or Thomas. Tears filled her eyes. Had they escaped? Or had something worse happened? Before panic consumed her, a new figure approached. He rode a magnificent black horse unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. The animal moved with quiet confidence, obeying the slightest touch of its rider. The man wore finely crafted buckskin clothing decorated with intricate beadwork. Eagle feathers rested behind his braided hair, and his expression remained calm despite the destruction around him. Every warrior stepped aside as he arrived. Respect surrounded him like an invisible shield. Eleanor immediately realized this was no ordinary warrior. He was their leader. His dark eyes met hers, not with hatred, but with careful observation. For several long moments, neither spoke. Finally, one of the warriors addressed him in the Comanche language. The leader listened before turning back to Eleanor. Though his English carried a noticeable accent, his words were clear. "You are alone." It wasn't a question. She swallowed hard. "My family." He glanced across the abandoned trail before answering quietly. "If they live, they have gone east." His honesty surprised her. He could have lied. Instead, he simply stated what he believed. "I won't hurt you," he continued. Eleanor wanted to believe him. Everything she had ever heard warned her not to. Yet nothing she had witnessed matched those frightening stories. The leader raised one hand, signaling his warriors. "No chains," he ordered. "No rough hands." The men obeyed immediately. A horse was brought forward. One of the older women from the camp approached carrying a blanket and a water skin. She gently wrapped the blanket around Eleanor's shoulders before offering her a drink. Kindness. It was the last thing Eleanor expected. As the warriors prepared to leave, the Comanche leader looked once more toward the empty horizon. Years of conflict had taught him that every battle created more sorrow than victory. He had not wanted another fight. But protecting his people had become the burden he carried every day. Without another word, he turned his horse westward. Eleanor followed, uncertain whether she was riding toward imprisonment, or toward a truth that would change everything she believed about the people she had been taught to fear. The journey westward lasted until the sun dipped below the endless horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and amber. Eleanor rode silently among the Comanche warriors, her hands free, though her uncertainty weighed heavier than any rope could have. No one spoke to her unless it was necessary. They rode with remarkable discipline, their movements almost effortless, as if horse and rider shared the same heartbeat. The prairie stretched endlessly before them. Herds of buffalo grazed in the distance, and hawks circled high overhead. Despite her fear, Eleanor found herself captivated by the beauty of the land. It was a world unlike the towns and farms she had always known, a world that seemed to breathe with its own quiet rhythm. Hours of riding had left her exhausted. Her body ached from the fall during the attack, and each jolt of the horse sent a sharp pain through her shoulder. She tried to hide her discomfort, determined not to appear weak before the strangers surrounding her. The Comanche leader, however, noticed. Riding several lengths ahead, he glanced back more than once. His sharp eyes missed little. When he saw Eleanor struggling to remain upright, he raised his hand, signaling the group to stop beside a small stream lined with cottonwood trees. The warriors dismounted immediately. Some watered the horses while others gathered firewood. Their camp came together with astonishing speed, every person knowing exactly what to do without needing instructions. Eleanor slid from her horse, but the moment her boots touched the ground, her knees buckled. She caught herself against the saddle, breathing hard. An older Comanche woman hurried toward her, speaking softly in words Eleanor could not understand. The woman gently touched Eleanor's shoulder and frowned when she realized how badly it had been bruised. Before Eleanor could protest, the leader approached. "You are injured," he said. "I can manage." He looked at her steadily. "No." It was not spoken harshly, but with quiet certainty. As Eleanor attempted another step, dizziness swept over her. The world tilted, and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she struck the ground. For an instant she froze, startled by the unexpected kindness. Without a word, the Comanche leader lifted her carefully, as though she weighed almost nothing. There was no roughness in his movements, no triumph in his expression. He simply carried her across the camp toward one of the larger lodges. The conversations around the camp continued without surprise. No one laughed. No one whispered. To them, caring for an injured person seemed as natural as tending a wounded horse or comforting a frightened child. Inside the lodge, soft buffalo robes covered a raised sleeping platform. The air smelled faintly of cedar, sweetgrass, and smoke from the evening fire. The leader lowered Eleanor gently onto the bed. "You need rest," he said. She stared at him, confused. "This isn't what I expected." A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I know." He stepped back, giving her space rather than crowding her. "Our people have many stories told about them," he continued. "Some are true. Many are not." The older woman entered carrying a wooden bowl filled with cool water and several bundles of herbs. She carefully cleaned the scrape on Eleanor's forehead before placing crushed medicinal leaves over the bruise on her shoulder. The cooling herbs eased the pain almost immediately. Eleanor watched in silence. Everything she had been taught insisted these people were her enemies. Yet she had been offered water before questions. Medicine before demands. Kindness before judgment. Outside, children laughed as they chased one another between the lodges. Women prepared the evening meal while several men repaired saddles and bows. The camp was alive with ordinary life, families working together, elders sharing stories, young people learning from those older than themselves. It was not the savage encampment Eleanor had imagined. Later, after darkness settled across the plains, the Comanche leader returned carrying a wooden bowl filled with warm stew. He placed it beside her. "You should eat." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He remained quiet for a moment before answering. "Because you are hungry. After everything that happened today." He nodded. "Wars create enough suffering. There is no honor in adding more." His words lingered in the silence. Eleanor studied his face, searching for deception, but found only weariness. The lines around his eyes spoke of responsibility rather than cruelty. "You fear us," he said calmly. She lowered her gaze. "Yes. I understand." He looked toward the entrance of the lodge, where the evening fire cast dancing shadows across the canvas walls. "My people also fear those who come from the east." Eleanor looked back at him. For the first time, she realized fear did not belong to one side alone. It belonged to everyone caught between two worlds. The leader rose to leave, pausing at the doorway. Before stepping outside, he spoke one final sentence. "Tomorrow, you will see how my people live. Judge us by what you witness, not by the stories others have told." The flap of the lodge closed behind him. Left alone, Eleanor lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp, the distant laughter of children, the soft songs of women tending the fires, and the gentle nickering of horses beneath the vast blanket of stars. For the first time since her capture, fear loosened its grip. Questions began to take its place. Perhaps the frontier was not divided simply between heroes and villains. Perhaps the truth was far more complicated than either side was willing to admit. Eleanor awoke to the gentle glow of dawn filtering through the seams of the lodge. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The soft bedding beneath her and the distant sound of birds created a sense of peace she had not felt in weeks. Then memory returned, the wagon train, the attack, her family, and the Comanche camp. She sat up slowly. Her shoulder still ached, but the herbal poultice the older woman had applied the night before had eased much of the pain. Outside, the camp was already awake. Children ran between the lodges, laughing as they played a game with carved sticks. Women tended cooking fires, grinding corn and preparing breakfast. Elderly men sat together, repairing leather harnesses while sharing stories in the Comanche language. Young warriors brushed their horses carefully, speaking to the animals with quiet affection. Nothing about the scene resembled the terrifying image Eleanor had carried in her mind. An older woman entered the lodge carrying fresh water and a small bundle of clean buckskin clothing. She smiled warmly. Pointing first to the clothing and then outside, she motioned that Eleanor should change and join the others. Though they shared no common language, her kindness needed no translation. After washing and changing, Eleanor stepped into the morning sunlight. Several people looked toward her, but none stared or whispered. They simply acknowledged her presence before returning to their work. The atmosphere surprised her. She had expected to be treated as an outsider. Instead, she was treated as a guest whose place had not yet been decided. Near the center of the camp, the Comanche leader stood speaking with several hunters. When he noticed Eleanor approaching, he dismissed the meeting and walked toward her. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I expected. The medicine helped." "Yes." He glanced briefly at her shoulder before seeming satisfied. "Our healer knows the plants of these plains better than anyone." For a few moments, they walked together through the camp. The leader pointed toward a group of boys practicing with small bows. They learn patience before they learn hunting. Nearby, several girls were weaving colorful blankets while an elderly woman instructed them. "Everyone learns to help the people," he explained. Eleanor watched as one young boy carefully offered food to an elderly man before eating himself. "You teach them to respect their elders." The leader smiled faintly. "If children forget those who came before them, they will not know where they are going." His words reminded Eleanor of her own father. Jonathan Whitmore had often said something similar around the family table. Different words. The same lesson. As they continued walking, they reached the horse enclosure. Dozens of magnificent horses grazed peacefully nearby. One chestnut mare approached the leader immediately, nudging his shoulder with obvious affection. Eleanor couldn't help smiling. "She knows you. She has carried me through many winters." He gently stroked the mare's neck. "A horse is not property. It is family." Eleanor thought of the settlers who often traded horses like tools. She had never considered another way of seeing them. Later that morning, the camp gathered near a large oak tree where several elders met to discuss matters affecting the tribe. No one interrupted them. Even the children remained respectfully quiet. Eleanor watched as every important decision was discussed carefully instead of being commanded by a single person. "You are their chief," she said. "They still advise you." The leader nodded. "A leader who refuses wisdom soon leads only himself." His answer surprised her again. She had imagined a ruler who demanded obedience. Instead, she found one who listened. That afternoon, Eleanor noticed several women preparing food for families whose hunters had not yet returned. No one counted portions. No one argued over ownership. Those who had more simply shared with those who had less. "Does everyone contribute?" Eleanor asked. "As they are able. And if someone cannot? Then others help." She looked around the camp. No one is left hungry. Not if we can prevent it. The simplicity of the answer struck her deeply. As the sun began to set, the camp gathered around a large fire. An elder stood and began telling an ancient story passed down through generations. Although Eleanor could not understand the language, she watched the faces around the flames. Children listened with wide eyes. Young warriors smiled knowingly. Parents quietly explained parts of the story to the youngest listeners. History here was not written in books. It lived in memory. After the storytelling ended, the leader joined Eleanor beside the fire. "You have been watching closely." "I have." "And?" She hesitated before answering honestly. "You are not what I expected." He looked thoughtfully into the flames. "Neither are you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "My warriors expected anger. I was angry. They expected hatred." She lowered her eyes. "I believed many things about your people." "So did we." Silence settled between them. Finally, he spoke again. "There is something my grandfather taught me when I was a boy." Eleanor looked at him. "He said that a person's heart cannot be known from a distance. Only by walking beside them." She considered those words carefully. For days, she had viewed every Comanche through the lens of stories told by frightened settlers. Now she was seeing individuals instead of legends. People instead of enemies. As the stars filled the night sky, Eleanor realized something that unsettled her more than fear ever had. The world she thought she understood was far more complicated than she had imagined. And perhaps the greatest journey before her was not across the prairie, but beyond her own assumptions. 3 days passed, and the rhythm of life in the Comanche camp became familiar to Eleanor. Each sunrise began with the sound of horses being watered at the nearby creek. Children gathered firewood before breakfast, while hunters rode into the plains long before the heat of the day settled over the grasslands. Although she was still a stranger, no one treated her with suspicion. Instead, they watched patiently, allowing her to learn without forcing her to choose a side. The Comanche leader kept his word. He never confined her to the lodge or placed guards at her side. She was free to walk through the camp, though she understood that leaving alone across the vast prairie would be dangerous. The open land was beautiful, but without food, water, or knowledge of the terrain, survival would be nearly impossible. One afternoon, Eleanor sat beside the healer who had cared for her injuries. The elderly woman sorted bundles of dried plants, explaining their uses through gestures and the few English words she knew. "This," she said, holding up a fragrant bundle, "fever." She lifted another. "Wound." Then another. "Cough." Eleanor repeated each word slowly, earning a warm smile from the healer. In return, Eleanor showed her how her mother had stitched torn clothing using small, nearly invisible seams. Though they spoke different languages, they laughed together whenever one misunderstood the other. It was the first friendship Eleanor had formed since arriving. Late that afternoon, a rider came racing toward the camp. His horse was covered in sweat, and urgency filled his voice as he called out in Comanche. Within moments, the peaceful atmosphere changed. Warriors hurried to gather their weapons. Women ushered children toward the safety of the larger lodges. The leader listened carefully to the messenger before turning toward the camp. Eleanor couldn't understand the language, but she recognized concern on every face. "What has happened?" she asked as the leader approached. "A group of armed men," he replied. "Not soldiers." "Who are they?" "They hunt anyone they believe stands in their way." "Settlers?" "Some." "Hunters?" "Traders?" "Native people?" "It makes no difference." He paused before adding quietly, "They seek horses, and they leave destruction behind." Without another word, he began organizing the camp's defenses. The older men moved the livestock farther into a narrow valley. Women gathered supplies that could be carried quickly if evacuation became necessary. Young warriors positioned themselves along the hills overlooking the camp. There was no panic. Only preparation. The leader turned to Eleanor. "You should remain inside the lodge. I can help. This is not your fight." She met his gaze. "If those men attack everyone, then it is." For a moment he studied her face, weighing her determination. Finally, he nodded. "Stay with the healer. Help those who cannot fight." Eleanor agreed. As evening approached, the first riders appeared on the distant ridge. There were nearly 20 of them. Unlike the disciplined Comanche warriors, these men rode carelessly, shouting to one another as they advanced. Several carried rifles across their saddles. Their intentions were unmistakable. One gunshot shattered the silence. Then another. The battle began. Warriors on horseback swept across the prairie with remarkable speed, using the rolling hills as cover. They avoided unnecessary risks, protecting the camp rather than chasing glory. Inside the largest lodge, Eleanor helped calm frightened children while the healer treated the first wounded warrior brought from the fighting. His arm had been grazed by a bullet. The healer quickly cleaned the wound while Eleanor held fresh bandages in place. "You have steady hands," the healer said in broken English. "I learned from my mother." Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. Suddenly, a frightened horse burst into the camp without its rider. A small child, startled by the noise, ran after it. "No!" several women cried. The child raced directly into the open. Eleanor saw what the others had not. One of the attackers had spotted the child. He raised his rifle. Without thinking, Eleanor sprinted forward. She reached the child just as another figure thundered across the prairie. The Comanche leader urged his black stallion into a full gallop, placing himself between the attacker and the child. A shot rang out. The bullet struck the leader's shoulder instead of the child. Ignoring his injury, he leaned down from the saddle, lifted both Eleanor and the frightened child onto his horse, and carried them back toward the safety of the camp. The remaining warriors drove the attackers away before darkness fully settled across the plains. The battle was over. The camp had survived. As the healer examined the leader's wounded shoulder, Eleanor stood nearby, her hands trembling. "This happened because of me," she whispered. The leader looked up. "No. You came after us." "I came after one of my people." He glanced toward the child now safely reunited with his mother. "And someone brave enough to protect him." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I was afraid." "So was I." She looked at him in surprise. "You were?" He smiled faintly despite the pain. "Courage is not the absence of fear." The healer carefully wrapped a clean bandage around his shoulder. "You acted anyway." That night, the camp gathered around the central fire once more. Though several warriors had been injured, everyone had returned safely. Families embraced one another. Children laughed again. Life continued. As Eleanor watched the flames dance beneath the stars, she realized something had changed within her. The Comanche leader had risked his own life without hesitation, not because she was a captive, but because he believed every life under his protection held equal value. For the first time since the attack on the wagon train, Eleanor no longer felt like a prisoner. She felt like someone who had been given a chance to understand a people she had once feared. And in the firelight, the distance between their two worlds seemed just a little smaller. The days following the attack were filled with quiet determination. The Comanche camp returned to its daily routine, but the recent battle had left its mark. Several lodges needed repairs, a few horses had been lost, and the wounded recovered under the careful watch of the healer. The Comanche leader's shoulder was healing, though he refused to rest for long. Every morning he inspected the camp, spoke with the elders, and rode through the surrounding hills to ensure no new threats were approaching. Eleanor noticed how no one questioned his dedication. He never asked others to do what he would not do himself. One cool morning, while gathering herbs with the healer near the edge of a stream, Eleanor heard a distant sound. Hoofbeats. Not many. Perhaps half a dozen riders. She climbed a small rise and looked across the prairie. In the distance, several mounted men carried the blue uniforms of the United States Army. Her heart raced. Soldiers. For the first time since the attack on the wagon train, hope surged through her. "They've found me," she whispered. One of the soldiers spotted her and waved. "Eleanor," he shouted. She hurried toward them until she reached a safe distance from the camp. The officer leading the patrol removed his hat politely. "My name is Captain William Hayes. We've been searching for survivors from the Whitmore wagon train." At the mention of her family, Eleanor's voice trembled. "My father, my brother, are they alive?" The captain nodded. "Your father survived the attack." Relief flooded through her. "And Thomas?" "He was injured, but he'll recover." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. For days she had feared the worst. "They're waiting at Fort Mason." She closed her eyes in gratitude. "They'll be overjoyed to know you're alive." For several moments, neither spoke. Then the captain's expression grew serious. "Where is the Comanche camp?" Eleanor hesitated. "It's nearby. We've tracked them this far." His tone had changed. Our orders are to eliminate the threat. The word struck her harder than she expected. Eliminate? The tribe has been blamed for several attacks on settlements. Eleanor looked back toward the distant camp. You don't understand. We understand enough. No, she said firmly. You don't. The captain frowned. They captured you. They also protected me. One of the younger soldiers laughed quietly. They've convinced you. They didn't convince me of anything. She met the captain's eyes. I watched them care for their children, their elders, and even a stranger. They are still our enemy. Not everyone carrying a weapon is your enemy. The captain sighed. Miss Whitmore, you've been through a difficult experience. You think I don't know what I've seen? He remained silent. We march at sunrise, he finally said. I suggest you return with us tonight. Eleanor looked once more toward the camp. Returning meant safety. Her family. Home. Everything she had dreamed about during the long journey west. But she also knew something the soldiers did not. The Comanche camp was filled with families. Children. Grandparents. People who had shown her compassion when they had every reason to distrust her. If she left without warning them, many innocent lives could be lost. I need time, she said quietly. You have until dawn. The captain turned his horse. We'll wait by the river. As the soldiers disappeared into the fading light, Eleanor stood alone beneath the wide prairie sky. Never had a decision felt so impossible. When she returned to the camp, the leader immediately sensed something was wrong. You have seen soldiers. She looked at him in surprise. How did you know? He smiled faintly. The prairie speaks. She lowered her head. They found me. And your family? They're alive. A look of genuine relief crossed his face. That is good news. His reaction caught her off guard. You aren't angry. Why would I be? I may leave tomorrow. He nodded slowly. You should be with your family. His calm acceptance made the choice even harder. She took a deep breath. They're coming here. The smile disappeared. To attack. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he asked, how many? A patrol now. She hesitated. But more will follow. The leader called for the elders. Within minutes they gathered inside the council lodge. Eleanor explained everything she had heard. No one interrupted her. No one accused her of betrayal. When she finished, the oldest elder spoke. The soldiers believe what they have been told. Another nodded. So did she. The leader looked around the circle. We will not fight if another path exists. An elder suggested moving the camp farther west before sunrise. Others agreed. The decision was unanimous. The camp would leave before the soldiers arrived. There would be no battle. No unnecessary deaths. As preparations began quietly through the night, Eleanor helped families pack their belongings. Children carried blankets. Women secured food supplies. The warriors erased signs of the camp, leaving as little trace as possible. Before dawn, the leader walked beside Eleanor to a hill overlooking the valley. The soldiers will find nothing. She nodded. I'm glad. So am I. He looked toward the eastern horizon where the first light touched the sky. You saved many lives tonight. I almost did nothing. But you didn't. She smiled sadly. I only told the truth. He turned to face her. Sometimes that requires more courage than drawing a weapon. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the prairie, the Comanche camp began moving westward in silence. Hours later, Captain Hayes and his patrol reached the empty valley. They found abandoned fire pits, faint hoofprints, and little else. The camp had vanished like the morning mist. Standing beside the captain, Eleanor looked across the quiet prairie. She knew she would soon be reunited with her family. Yet she also knew she would never again see the frontier in simple terms of good and evil. She had learned that people could be divided by language, customs, and history, but united by compassion, honor, and the courage to choose mercy over vengeance. And that lesson would remain with her long after the planes disappeared behind her. The journey back to Fort Mason took 2 days. Although Eleanor rode with Captain Hayes and his patrol, her thoughts remained on the quiet valley the Comanche had left behind. She often looked toward the western horizon, wondering where they were now and whether they had reached safety. The prairie seemed endless, swallowing every trail until nothing remained but waving grass beneath the open sky. When the wooden walls of Fort Mason finally came into view, Eleanor's heart pounded. People hurried across the parade ground as the patrol entered through the gates. Before her horse had fully stopped, she spotted 2 familiar faces. Eleanor. Her father rushed toward her. Jonathan Whitmore looked older than she remembered. A bandage wrapped around his left arm, and weeks of worry had etched deep lines across his face. Beside him stood Thomas, his younger brother's leg still healing but strong enough to run. The family embraced tightly, tears replacing the words none of them could find. "I thought I'd lost you," Jonathan whispered. "So did I." For several minutes, nothing else mattered. The long days of uncertainty, fear, and grief gave way to overwhelming relief. Later that evening, seated around a small table inside the fort, Eleanor told her story. She described the attack on the wagon train. She spoke of waking in the Comanche camp. She explained how the healer had treated her injuries, how families had shared their food, and how the chief had protected both her and the children during the battle with the outlaws. Her father listened without interrupting. Captain Hayes, however, remained skeptical. "You expect us to believe they simply released you? They never held me in chains. They were still your captors. They became my protectors." The room fell silent. Jonathan looked thoughtfully at his daughter. "You've changed." Eleanor nodded. "I have." "What changed you?" She looked out the window toward the fading light. "I stopped believing stories told by people who had never truly known one another." Over the following weeks, Eleanor remained at the fort while her father recovered. News spread that the Comanche camp had vanished before the soldiers arrived. Some officers viewed it as a missed opportunity. Others quietly admitted that avoiding another battle had likely saved lives on both sides. One afternoon, Captain Hayes approached Eleanor outside the fort. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him with surprise. "For what?" "I believe there was only one version of the truth." He removed his hat respectfully. "You reminded me that war often hides it." Eleanor smiled. "Perhaps we all needed reminding." Several months later, representatives from nearby settlements and Comanche leaders agreed to meet under a temporary flag of peace. The negotiations were difficult. Years of broken promises and violence had created deep wounds. Many doubted any agreement could last. To Eleanor's surprise, she was invited to attend, not as a negotiator, but as someone who had lived among both worlds. When the Comanche delegation arrived, she immediately recognized the chief. His shoulder had fully healed. He wore the same quiet confidence she remembered, though there was relief in his eyes when he saw that she and her family were safe. For a brief moment, they simply nodded to one another. No words were needed. During the council, Eleanor translated when misunderstandings arose. She explained customs that settlers had misinterpreted and helped clarify concerns from both sides. The conversations lasted for days. There were disagreements. Moments of anger. Long periods of silence. Yet no weapons were drawn. For the first time in years, both sides remained at the same table. Before the final meeting ended, the Comanche leader addressed everyone present. "My father taught me that peace is harder than war." The interpreter translated carefully. "In war, a man only needs courage." He paused. In peace, he needs courage and patience. The room remained silent. Even the soldiers seemed to reflect on his words. The agreement that emerged was modest. It did not erase the past, nor did it solve every conflict. But it established safe routes for travelers, designated hunting grounds, and regular meetings between community leaders to settle disputes before violence erupted. It was only a beginning. But every lasting journey begins with a single step. On the morning the Comanche prepared to depart, Eleanor walked with the chief to the edge of the prairie. "The world will not change overnight," she said. "No. But perhaps it can change." He looked across the endless plains. "That depends on whether people choose fear, or understanding." She smiled. "I'll remember that." He reached into a small leather pouch hanging from his belt and removed a hand-carved wooden horse. "I made this during the winter." He placed it in her hand. "In my people's tradition, a horse represents the journey we travel." Eleanor ran her fingers over the careful carving. "I'll treasure it." She reached into her satchel and removed a small leather-bound journal. "It belonged to my mother." Inside its blank pages she had begun recording the words, customs, and stories she had learned while living among the Comanche. "So their story won't be forgotten," she said. The chief accepted the gift with quiet gratitude. "Our children may read different stories than we did. I hope they do." With that, they parted. The Comanche riders disappeared into the western horizon, becoming silhouettes against the golden prairie before fading from sight. Years later, Eleanor would become a respected teacher and writer, encouraging young people to question prejudice and seek understanding before judgment. Her journals, filled with memories of both settler life and Comanche traditions, became a bridge between cultures that had long viewed each other with fear. Whenever visitors asked what had changed her life, she never spoke first about battles or captivity. Instead, she remembered a quiet evening in a lodge on the prairie, where compassion had replaced fear and kindness had challenged everything she believed. History often remembers wars. But Eleanor believed the future would be shaped by those who chose peace. And somewhere beyond the western horizon, where the tall grass still danced with the wind, two worlds had taken their first uncertain step toward understanding.